All set? So most of the crops grown in the U.S. are commodity crops, field crops like corn, soybean, wheat, and cotton. And most of the farms that grow these crops typically grow only one or two of them. And typically they're grown with intensive use of chemicals, fertilizers and pesticides. Intensive use of chemicals is the norm for American farming. Since World War II, the chemical industries have provided farmers with fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides to make farming less labor-intensive and more profitable. Many farmers have come to believe that farming with chemicals is the only way to farm. Now, as agricultural ecologists, we've become concerned about the widespread use of chemicals in agriculture. One chemical to solve one problem that sometimes creates new problems. Ecologists try to bring a systems approach to solving agricultural issues, and in particular, a systems approach that emphasizes biology. As ecologists, we've studied the environment and learned nature's checks and balances. We wondered back in the 80s whether we might be able to bring some of these insights and lessons to agricultural production. So rather than applying a chemical to solve a problem, we wondered if we could use more of nature's way of managing the agricultural system. And the primary focus, The primary focus of farmers is crop yield. And we've begun to expand this focus a bit beyond yield in our research to other things that farming can also provide, such as clean water, clean air, wildlife, green space, and lowered greenhouse gas emissions. Broadly speaking, we call these ecosystem services, things that nature provides that people value, and they tend to go unrecognized and often unvalued. Since we began our research in 1988, we've studied 4 alternative systems of growing the field crops typical of many Midwestern farms, corn, soybeans, and wheat. One of our cropping systems uses the same conventional farming techniques used by most Midwest farmers. This includes chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides applied at normal rates. Another is biologically based, using organic techniques. It depends solely on biology to provide fertility and pest protection to produce yield. And a third is a no-till system, which means we don't till the ground, we don't plow the ground for weed control, but plant directly into last season's crop residue, and we kill weeds with herbicides rather than tillage. And then a fourth uses organic practices, but with one important difference: we add 1/3 of the chemicals that we add to the conventional system. And we call this system a reduced input system. Now, we followed these 4 systems for the last 25 years and have found a number of interesting outcomes. First, the yields from the biologically based system with some added chemicals were the same as yields in the conventional system. And they delivered additional important ecosystem services. This system accumulated more soil organic matter, it lost a lot less nitrate to groundwater, and had more beneficial insects. And despite these lower yields, the biologically based organic system also had, I need to start that one again.
Stop. Whenever.
Okay. So we followed these 4 systems for the last 25 years and found a number of interesting outcomes. First, the yields from the biologically based system with some added chemicals equaled yields in the conventional system and delivered additional important ecosystem services. The system accumulated more soil organic matter, it lost a lot less nitrate to groundwater, and it had more beneficial insects. And despite lower yields, the biologically based, the organic system provided even more ecosystem services. The 3 alternative farming techniques reduced greenhouse gas emissions. 2 actually captured more greenhouse gases than they emitted. I think it's going more slowly than it was.
Yeah.
All of this shows that farming practices can contribute to environmental solutions. We can design cropping systems to improve soil, to pollute less, and to capture greenhouse gases if we want to. Now, why aren't farmers using these systems? It's primarily economics. Adding chemicals is less expensive than adding cover crops or labor. Chemicals make it possible to farm more acres, and farmers aren't paid for these ecosystem services. They're paid for yield. An organic farmer can charge more for their crops to compensate for the extra labor that's required, while farmers who use a third of the fertilizer and pesticides don't give the consumer an organic product. Society gets 4 important environmental benefits: cleaner air and water, healthier soil. So one particular service that is provided by agricultural systems that are managed biologically that is not often recognized is pest protection. Chemicals make it possible to farm more acres. These biologically managed systems can harbor bugs that are beneficial. That is, not all bugs can charge more for their crops to compensate for the extra labor. Bugs that eat other pests, the carnivores, and pesticides, are actually quite helpful to crops. So, for example, ladybird beetles will eat aphids, and aphids are an important pest in soybeans. It's only fair that we all share the cost. When a soybean crop gets infested with aphids, if the ladybird beetle is around, it will colonize. An organic farmer can charge more for their crops to compensate for the extra labor involved, while farmers who use a third of the fertilizer and pesticides don't give the consumer an organic product. Society gets 4 important environmental benefits: cleaner air and water, healthier soil, and greenhouse gas reduction. It's only fair that we all share the cost. We need national policies that pay the farmer for these additional services. I'm not sure that last part had the right emphasis either. An organic farmer can charge more for their crops to compensate for the extra labor involved, while farmers who use a third of the fertilizer and pesticides don't give the consumer an organic product. Society gets 3 important environmental benefits: cleaner air and water, healthier soil, and greenhouse gas reduction. It's only fair that we all share the cost. We need national policies that pay the farmer for these additional services. Now, this is a new idea. So in biologically based farming, we provide habitats for those beneficial insects like ladybugs or ladybird beetles. I think I was looking at the camera instead of you, though. Okay. So in biologically based farming, we provide habitat for those beneficial insects, for the predators of pests, such as ladybird beetles or ladybugs. And when there are no aphids on the crops, they'll then go to the habitat for food rather than starve. One of the hidden services that agricultural systems can provide and also benefit from is related to pest protection. And it's related to the idea that not all bugs in an agricultural system are bad. In fact, a lot of the bugs that are there are eating the pests that eat the crops. And we've discovered that this service, this pest predation service that is provided to crops, is better provided by biologically managed systems and by systems that include natural areas within the landscape, so that these natural systems are effectively habitat, or what scientists would call refugia, for the beneficial bugs. Ladybird beetles, for example, eat aphids, and these ladybird beetles have to live somewhere when the aphids aren't on the soybean plants, and they typically will live in areas around a farm field that is in natural vegetation or in another crop that might host aphids at that point. And when the aphid outbreak occurs in the soybean field, for example, the ladybird beetles will migrate in from that natural habitat, eat the ladybird beetles, and reduce the need for chemicals to control them.
Eat the ladybird beetles?
Did I say that?
Yeah.
The soybean field and eat the aphids. But in order for the ladybird beetles to be around, there has to be other habitat in the area that will support them when the aphids are not on the soybeans. And this more natural habitat, or sometimes other crops, provides this additional refugia, as they're called by ecologists, to support the predators when there are no pests in the crops to be controlled. Land-grant universities used to have the responsibility and the public funding to improve seed stock for farmers. Over the past 40 years or so, most funding for seed breeding has shifted from public funds to private industry, and in particular to agribusiness conglomerates that produce both seeds and chemicals. For example, some 90% of the corn and soybeans planted in the U.S. is genetically modified, and just 3 companies own around 90% of the patents and produce around 90% of the seeds. The upside to this is efficiency. The downside is that there's very little breeding done with non-GMO seeds for major commodity crops like corn, soybean, and cotton. One of the things we've wondered is where farmers get the information they need to make decisions about how many chemicals to apply, how much fertilizer and pesticides to put on their fields. And in our surveys of Michigan farmers, we've discovered that most farmers get that information from fertilizer dealers and seed companies. Only around 17 to 18% use university recommendations as their primary source of information. And that, well,
Go ahead.
I don't know that I need to go further than that, but and one can imagine that that leads to a bit of a conflict of interest in that the farmers are getting advice on how much to use from the folks that are selling them the product. And so it's only natural to assume that in many cases more may be applied than would be otherwise needed. And it does tend to be the case that the university recommendations are more conservative than what farmers typically apply. That is, the university recommendations, which are based on field research, show that less fertilizer is usually needed than what is typically applied.